into obviously like 70s vintage is always like hugely requested in sync, and you see it being used a lot, the authentic recordings in all kinds of media. What do you think have been like the standout kind of genres of last year, and where do you think it's going to go this year?
See, I like whenever it comes to like predicting eras of music, I always find that quite a difficult thing to like. I mean, as much as, you know, things are leaning a little bit into that funk disco kind of vibe in terms of like influences we're hearing in like commercially released music. That's what's so amazing about music, and like what people end up wanting to create atmospherically and story arc wise with it is it's just so impossible to say. Like I did I was doing a session with a publisher, and they asked me like, what kind of music have you never been briefed on? And I was like, heavy metal music. I've never had a heavy metal music brief, especially for an advert. And I shit you not, within a week, that was exactly the brief that I had. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. I know. I was like, oh my God. So, but definitely I think those kind of like, those hybrid combinations where you've got things like, you know, big string like elements, but with that disco-y, like funky kind of vibe that has kind of been, there have been elements of that have been threaded through, I'd suppose, over the past like 6 or so years. But I feel like, especially with like the emergence of like even more like dance music being really, really popular, and like all of those genres kind of coming up, that, you know, that is where that genre started, is actually disco. So I just feel like there's like, that's my inkling that elements of that, and I'm hoping will end up being subverted, and some really interesting things will be done with those influences.
I've lost count the amount of times that I've heard the cover of is it Higher Love? You know, that dance track. How many times has that been synced? I think that was like one of the most synced trends of probably the past few years, isn't it? But covers, ads are still used a lot, aren't they? And like stripped back kind of covers was used for a while, quite a lot.
It's not going away, is it? Not fast, and particularly in the trailer world,
them, isn't it? Let's be honest, they don't have to pay for the
and it also does it ticks a number of boxes in terms of things are, you know, with a cover song, you've got that added advantage that even if it's completely different from the original, and probably it should be, but you still have that sort of nostalgic pull back to that song. You know, they have a magic thing that they can conjure up because it has that familiarity and power that nostalgia plays in when you listen to a cover, and it can propel you back to the original, and then but you can also give it a new twist. And I think that's very,
especially if it's done like really, really well, can really make it really current. Sometimes can even give it a whole new lease of life.
Also, like, the hits of today like don't feel like they stick around for the same amount of time. So like the amount of like power that you have in the recognizability, if that's even a word, of like those big mega hits of the 70s, 80s, and even 90s is like, it just feels like that was quite a sweet spot for kind of the, you know, like the industry not being so super saturated with like tons and tons of releases happening all the time, whether it's independent via small labels, big labels, etc. And like just where like touring, charting, like record sales, all of that stuff was still kind of cohesively on the up to an extent, or at least in a plateau state. So even like the big tracks of today, I kind of wonder sometimes if they will have the same pull and allure cross generationally as those tracks do now. Does that make sense?
It does, because I think back in the day, and without harping on about it too much, is you had a central hub. You know, in this country, we had Top of the Pops. Thursday night, you watch Top of the Pops. And then Friday morning, you're in the school playground talking about Top of the Pops. Did you hear this band? You know, Adam the Ants or whatever it would have been.
Used to record the chart on a Sunday. Your tape cassette.
There you go. Yeah. So
you didn't? Am I just showing my age?
No.
like, also don't forget that I'm half my life in Canada, so left Canada.
Well, you didn't have tapes?
No, I just didn't have Top of the Pops.
Oh, okay.
So it was more MTV for me.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And Much Music Corner, which is the Toronto based. Yeah.
But I'm very old, so I remember, so I remember the chart show on the Sunday night, and they're waiting to find out what
when people cared,
what would be number one, and
it's a big moment.
Having that sort of central hub made it much smaller, so everyone was kind of watching the same TV, listening to the same music, very much so. So now it's just very, very disbanded, and as you said, Liz, the sort of things pop up. And then they go, sorry, that wasn't a plug for my company, but
that in there.
See what I did?
That was smooth.
Yes. But syncs are, I mean, that's actually one of the reasons why I call pop-up music is because a sync comes along, it pops up and it goes. And it's that quick. But so will the hits of today have the longevity that this sort of golden period, if we like, of the past from let's say the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s and even into the 2000s to a degree had as kind of what we would call the sort of the golden period, maybe hitting a sweet spot in this late, in the 70s when just there was so much different music and so much diversity within music, which was really great. But I hope songs of today will have that same impact, and but who knows?
We can't get away from like AI, and it's really interesting to see where that's going to go with music, and the authenticity of it, especially what you can already do in terms of like copying artists, and it sounds exactly like them. It's scary. It's exciting, but a scary time, I feel. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, mine personally, I think if it's used in the right way, I think it could be a really exciting tool. Yeah. And I think it's something to embrace and really, really enhance and really use. And until AI can get a heart, now what do I mean by that is the reason why, let's say, someone like Taylor Swift is so popular is, she writes songs about relationships, and she gets her heart broken, and her fans can relate to her, and so those songs have a human attached to them. And I think AI doesn't yet have that human aspect. So even if it does write something that's really, really good, which it can do and is very capable of, and let's say, give me a song like Taylor Swift, it can do it, and it can write the lyrics like Taylor Swift in that style. But because there's no attachment to it as a human, I still
experience.
I think so. That human experience is missing, and I think it's really difficult to sort of relate to that. And we as human beings, we like to relate to things, and the whole heartbreak thing is obviously a theme. It sells. Yeah, it sells. We can all relate to it, right? We've all been there.
Yeah.
And the AI, until you can rip out its heart and literally throw it on the floor and stamp on it.
Won't it copy human behaviors though?
It will, but you can't relate it to because it's an AI thing.
It's an experience.
Yeah.
So experience.
I had a very long conversation with a friend of mine who's actually an AI designer.
Okay.
And I have had many, many long conversations because I am convinced exactly like what you're saying, that I'm like, but AI, it's like, when they were 3, they didn't have this thing happen that scarred them for life, that meant that they picked up the piano or started singing. And then they didn't have this exact situation with their siblings that then meant that they felt like they had to go away. And like, and then just in terms of who they are, they didn't take all of those things and instead of going inward or being destructive, decide that they wanted to be creative. So I'm like, how do you then account for all of those components of the human experience? Never mind the stuff that people actually write about, but like what actually situates them in a position to desire that outlet, to desire creativity as the conduit for self-expression, and even to express rather than to like repress, like what's going on. And he was like, there will be a time where you can input various like story points of what could happen to a human being that could allow that, like, so that their personal narrative would actually become like a human, which I find completely terrifying and bizarre. And then my next argument is always, but what about things like the, like the tactile stuff? So there's all of this stuff that we can say via story, but then what about actual interactions like touch, like what it feels like to that person to hug that person that matters to them that they write the song about, or what it feels like to like be in a magical place where the sun's beating down on your skin, and like what that feels like to that person with those. So I think like even moving beyond like the kind of heart and soul component, that kind of like the fact that we are multisensorial as beings, and the fact that all of that plays a dynamic with our human experience, our emotional experience, our mental experience, that feels like that would be a very difficult thing to replicate. But from like a smaller standpoint, I think even things like, maybe artists and musicians that aren't necessarily aiming at having like big record deals or releases are the ones that are struggling a lot. Like singers that would normally be demoing and be, a sound alike for, an Adele or whatever. So when artists or writers are pitching their tracks to be considered by her team or by her, that that now that job can be replaced. And I think that's for me where the the big artists are not necessarily going to suffer, because they already have the stage, they already have people's attention in terms of like a buy-in to who they are and what they want to be saying next. It's all of those people that craft like the background, and that's the part that feels really sad to me, because like those people still have an artistry and they still have something really worthwhile to offer, and that's what feels like it might be at risk of being cut off more.
Same for composers as well.
100%. Yeah.
Because it will be able to replicate, I want this to sound like John Williams.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard of a composer that's based his whole career off of John Williams. He even pictures himself as the cheaper John Williams. He's built a whole career out of it.
Oh, wow.
Fantastic.